Hello, everyone. My name is Rishikesh Kulkarni. I'm a statistician at Cytel and head the customer experience group here. Welcome to our on-demand webinar on saddle point approximation method. This is the third and the last in a three-part on-demand webinar series featuring new elements from our latest release of StatExact and LogExact. The first two webinars in the series were on unconditional tests for stratified two binomials and tests for evaluating multiple endpoints. You can listen to these webinars by visiting our website, www.cytel.com. StatExact and LogExact are the leading toolkits for exact inference, power analysis, and regression analysis. I'm delighted to introduce my colleague Ashwini Joshi, who is our webinar presenter today. Ashwini is a subject matter expert in mathematics at Cytel. She received an MSc from IIT Bombay, and prior to joining the industry, she was an assistant professor in mathematics at the PVG College of Engineering and Technology. In this webinar, Ashwini will take us through a deep dive of saddle point approximation method developed in LogExact for logistic regression and Poisson regression for unstratified data. In the latest release, LogExact provides an option to use saddle point approximation to get inference conditioned on more than one nuisance parameters. Saddle point approximation using higher order asymptotic is much faster and takes minimal resources to produce results close to exact conditional inference. I will now hand over to Ashwini for the presentation, and we will conclude this presentation with a discussion of some frequently asked questions. Over to you, Ashwini.
Thank you, Rishikesh. Hello all, I'm going to talk about saddle point approximation method that we recently developed in LogExact version 12. Outline of this presentation is here. First, I'll talk about new features in LogExact 12. Then I'll talk about higher order asymptotic methods that are gaining popularity nowadays in regression analysis. Then I'll come to the main topic of this presentation, saddle point approximation, and then we'll see some examples. To start with, let's see new features that are developed in LogExact 12. Mainly the saddle point approximation for logistic regression and Poisson regression for unstratified data, and penalized maximum likelihood estimate method for multinomial regression. Then we have developed the method for three model types: for unordered response, for adjacent category model, and for continuation ratio model. Penalized likelihood method was already developed in LogExact for binary outcomes and count outcome. So we have extended it in this version for multinomial outcomes. Now we'll go back to our main topic, that is saddle point approximation method. It is an estimation method. So let's see what are the existing estimation methods. The most popular is maximum likelihood estimate. For generalized linear models, people rely on likelihood-based estimates, and the parameter which will maximize the likelihood is of interest. So the maximum likelihood estimate is the most used method, most frequently used method. Among disadvantages of using only maximum likelihood estimate is we cannot get the conditional inference. When we simply use maximum likelihood estimate, for unstratified data, we get unconditional inference. But in regression analysis, when we have multiple covariates and not all of them are of the same importance, or if we are interested in only some of them, while others we cannot throw away or they are also cannot be ignored, in such cases, some conditioning has to be done on those parameters which are of not prime interest right now. We call them as nuisance parameters. And what different conditioning can be done on these nuisance parameters in log exact that we'll first see. The first method is stratified analysis. So suppose we have data from different sites where clinical trial is conducted, and we are interested in finding the relationship between treatment and the response, but we cannot ignore the site. So in that case, we can do the stratification. We can use site as a strata, and the site-specific constants are suppressed. So that kind of conditioning is done in stratified, where the stratum variable is used, but it's conditioned, and finally we get only the overall effect of treatment and response. Overall effect of treatment on response. So in stratified analysis, we condition on only one variable, which is stratum, and get the partially conditioned inference on all other covariates. The second method, that is exact method, is complete conditional. So here it's not conditioning on any one of the covariate, not necessarily only one of the covariates. You can divide the set of covariates into two parts. One as the covariates of interest, and remaining could be covariates which are of not that importance, but we can treat them as nuisance parameter. So in exact method, we condition on all covariates except one, which is of interest. We keep all other covariates at their observed value fixed, and we only vary the parameter of interest and get the inference for one covariate at a time. So it is a complete conditioning. So the covariate which is of interest, except that all other covariates are conditioned at their observed value. And in the latest version of log exact, we have developed another complete conditional method, but asymptotic method, that is saddle point approximation. So before going into details of saddle point approximation, let's see from where this method arises. It comes from higher order asymptotic. So in likelihood inferences, we write the likelihood function up to the first order derivative terms. But recently, people are using higher order asymptotic. So the way we do Taylor expansion, if we expand log likelihood with second order, third order derivatives and so on, we expect to get better and better approximation. So higher order asymptotic actually uses higher orders of log likelihood expansions. Saddle point approximation is one such method. Further to that, there is not only one method that is called as saddle point approximation. There are many variations in saddle point approximation. The first is modified profile likelihood, which we have implemented. So we'll see that method in detail. Then modified test statistics. So the test statistics that we use for hypothesis testing, it could be Wald statistic or score statistic. You can modify that using more terms with the expansion. The third is quite similar to exact method, that is cumulant based method, but I'm not going to talk about it. It is not yet available in log exact, but you will see it in future release. So the first method, that is modified profile likelihood. So I'm going to talk about it in detail. For modified profile likelihood, first we should have the profile likelihood. So in profile likelihood, what we do is, suppose we want to compute the profile likelihood of one parameter beta 1 only, and we have such, say, p parameters beta 1, beta 2, beta 3, beta p. Then here the conditioning is done on the remaining covariates or remaining parameters by taking the maximum likelihood estimate for them. So the likelihood is computed for a fixed value of beta 1, and once beta 1 is fixed, what will be the maximum likelihood estimate for remaining betas that will be computed, and then we'll compute the log likelihood for this set. The fixed beta 1 and the ML is of remaining beta, so that beta R stands for remaining. In the modified profile log likelihood, what we'll do is the original profile log likelihood will remain, and as we have said, one extra term, higher order term will be added. The second derivative term with respect to remaining beta will be added and computed at maximum likelihood estimates of remaining beta. Using this modified profile log likelihood, we'll compute the point estimate and interval estimate. How to compute such point or interval estimate using profile likelihood, that first we'll see, then we'll apply the same procedure for modified profile likelihood. So in profile likelihood method, what we do is first see what happens for single covariate. The log likelihood is plotted here. On x-axis it is a parameter, that is beta, and on y-axis we have the log likelihood function. When we use the Wald method to compute the confidence interval, what we do is we find the point where the likelihood is maximum, that is MLE we said, and then we compute the standard error, and then we find such equidistant points, MLE plus minus 2 or 3 sigma, and equidistant points from MLE for computing the Wald lower and upper CI limits. You can see if the likelihood function is not symmetric, as it is in this case. If it would have been symmetric, the Wald CIs would be good, and you can see the tail areas would be same, almost same. But in this case, because the log likelihood is not symmetric about its MLE, it's skewed on one side. The tail areas on left and right tail are drastically different. So these Wald CI limits actually don't represent the confidence levels correctly when the likelihood function is not symmetric about its MLE. In such cases, profile likelihood method helps. In profile likelihood, what we do is, instead of having such cuts, vertical cuts, we have the horizontal cut. See what is the maximum likelihood. In this case, log likelihood. We'll denote it by L max. Now we are interested in 2 points which will give us the likelihood value as L max minus half times chi-square 1 minus alpha with 1 degree of freedom. So we'll find 2 points shown here using blue points, which give us the likelihood as L naught. So these 2 points will now represent the confidence interval computed using profile likelihood method. And you can easily see that the tail area probabilities using these 2 points are quite similar. At least they are not drastically different as they are in case of Wald confidence interval. So when the likelihood is not symmetric about its MLE, people prefer to use profile likelihood based confidence interval over Wald confidence interval. So this is a simple procedure for single covariate. When there are multiple covariates, what happens is we fix one beta value for the desired covariate, and then we maximize the likelihood function over all other parameters. And again, we'll have for each beta the corresponding likelihood function, and we'll repeat the process for each desired covariate like this. So whatever we have seen for profile likelihood method in saddle point, we'll perform it for modified profile likelihood, but the procedure remains the same. Now let us see one example where saddle point approximation is implemented. I've considered a study related to HIV. The study is about perinatal infection and HIV infection investigated among infants at 6 months of age. So these infants have got infection from their mother before birth or during birth. Some infection is observed, but If it will eventually turn into HIV infection or not, that is to be decided. So that is the response. If it will eventually become HIV infection or not, so it is binary response. And for that analysis, the covariates that are used are blood serum levels of CD4 and CD8 serum. CD4 are the white blood cells that fight infection, and CD8 are also white blood cells that kill cancer cells or other invaders or fast-growing cells. So the aim of this study is, if the infant has better immune system, then can they fight the HIV infection? So even though they have some infection at birth, some perinatal infection, it will not get converted to HIV infection. Is it possible or not? And if these two serum levels are responsible for this immune system, strong immune system or not. That is the idea of this study, behind this study. Here is the data. It's not quite large. Here are the serum levels at 6 months of age in infants. The serum levels are converted into categorical data, that is 0, 1, and 2 are the 3 levels for CD4. Same thing for CD8, they are converted to categorical data. Here is the proportion of developing HIV. So out of 7 infants, 4 eventually developed HIV infection. So the percentage is 57% when their CD4 and CD8 levels were at 0 level at 6 months of age. Here out of 1 infant developed HIV infection. So you can see here CD4 is increasing. So as CD4 level is increasing, overall the percentages of developing HIV is decreasing. So just by looking at the data, we may feel that CD4 is an important covariate or significant covariate, but the data is small and we cannot just rely on our guess. We should see what regression analysis tells us. So let's see how we can do that using log exact. So here is Cytel Studio open and the data, HIV data is open. Here non-parametric and power and sample size menu stands for stat exact. We are interested in regression analysis, that comes in log exact. So on this data, we will perform regression analysis. Here is the HIV infection. 1 stands for HIV infection and 0 stands for no infection, or infection is not eventually converted into HIV. CD4, CD8 shows the levels of blood serum levels of CD4 and CD8, and here is the frequency. Let's go to regression menu. It is binary response and we are interested in logistic model. And here is the input screen. We can choose the variables for response. It is HIV. The covariate that we want to check are CD4 and CD8. And the frequency will be considered as weight. If we want to include intercept term, we'll select it. If we don't want, we can deselect it. For the time being, let us keep it. We can have the estimation or hypothesis testing. If there are many covariates, then we can also have best subset selection. So right now we'll only stick to estimation because that's what we are interested in. Various computation methods are available in log exact, asymptotic, exact, Monte Carlo, and the recently developed SPA. So here I'll choose the SPA method. We can also save the distribution of SPA method. And in options tab, we have the general tab where you can specify confidence level. If you're using iterative procedure, then how many iterations you want to perform, what kind of output you want, one-sided or two-sided p-value, what kind of parameter you want to see in the form of beta, that is log odds, or the odds ratio. As exact methods take a lot of time, you may want to specify memory, time limit, and so on. Similarly, you have Monte Carlo options, that is the seed, which random number generator you want to use, how many samples you want to draw for the Monte Carlo simulations, and so on. And then the response value you can specify. Currently, we are not talking about the penalized MLE. That is another method which we discussed initially. Right now, we are interested in MLE kind of estimation, but using SPA method. And we can say OK, and we'll see the output here. Here the batch is generated. You can copy the batch and paste it in the command prompt or in the new submit window and rerun the regression analysis, or you can make changes here itself and do that if you don't want to use the UI again and don't want to enter all the inputs again. Here are the input section given in the basic information. Then there is a summary statistic for model fitting and the parameter estimation. In the parameter estimation, you can see the MLE beta and SPA beta. You can also see the standard errors, the confidence intervals, the p-values, and INF and NP, that is the nuisance parameter related values. I have already executed this example in log exact, and I will show you the output directly here. Here I have compiled the output for asymptotic method MLE, the exact method which is shown by CMLE, and the SPA method. If you look at the beta values of CD4, you will see that the exact estimate and SPA estimate are quite close. Also, the standard errors are quite close. So, SPA is quite close to exact as compared to MLE, because we have seen MLE is an unconditional inference, while exact and SPA are conditional inferences. So, SPA, even though it is asymptotic, because we have done the complete conditioning, the results are quite close to exact. Same thing you can see even for CD8. We will also see how it can be done, how we can see the comparison graphically. Here the log likelihood is plotted against beta. So on x-axis there is beta value and on y-axis log likelihood. There are 4 plots. The green is asymptotic log likelihood. You can see here it is symmetric about its MLE that we have seen. The red line shows exact log likelihood. So here's the exact log likelihood. It is not symmetric about its MLE. It's bit skewed. Then the profile log likelihood follows similar pattern as exact, but the values are not close to exact. But again, the log likelihood, profile log likelihood is not symmetric about its MLE. Then the modified profile log likelihood, where we have said we'll be adding one extra term of higher order derivative, that you can see that the modified profile likelihood, the blue line, is showing the similar pattern as exact, and also the values are quite close to exact. So in general, the modified profile likelihood gives us results similar to exact, but the method is asymptotic, so it doesn't need the computational resources as much as we want for exact. So it's a better alternative to exact when we are happy with the approximation and we are not interested in the precise result. Though when we want the precise result, we should perform exact analysis. So we'll see the advantages and disadvantages of saddle point approximation, which we have already seen in this presentation. advantage is the conditional inference we can get. We don't have to do the inference for all the covariates at a time. We can condition on some of them and get only the important inferences. Results of SPA method are close to that of exact method, we have seen, even though SPA is asymptotic. And the main advantage is SPA is not as complex or computationally intensive as exact, so we can get the results faster. The major disadvantage is, after all, it is maximum likelihood. We are just taking the profile likelihood and modifying it, but the disadvantages of MLE still remain there. Like for near separation data, MLE cannot be computed. Similarly, SPA cannot be computed. So such disadvantages remain. Also, the tail area approximation may not be good as we are adding higher order derivatives. The tail area approximation may not be good for SPA. We have done only one method of saddle point approximation, but Professor Patel from Cytel, he is actually researching on many other variants of SPA. So one of the important is cumulant-based SPA. So you might see it in future version of log exact, the cumulant-based SPA. Then the complete conditioning and the conditioning like exact that will be performed. So that will be the double saddle point. So instead of only conditioning on one beta, there will be a double saddle point method. And one of the disadvantages, as we said, that for near separation data, MLE doesn't exist, and that's why SPA also cannot exist. So for MLE, we have done the penalized maximum likelihood estimation method. So we may have some combination of SPA and penalized likelihood. So that could be another area of future work. Here are the references. The main reference is this book by Brezhale and other authors, Applied Asymptotics, Case Studies in Small Sample Statistics. So we mainly relied on this book, but there are some other references also which we used while developing this method of modified profile likelihood. Thank you. Now we'll have discussion on some frequently asked questions on saddle point approximation method. So over to you, Rishikesh.
Thank you, Ashwini, for this great session on saddle point approximation. Yes, so we're going to discuss some common questions on this topic. We do have 3 questions. The first one is going back to that plot on comparison of MLE, CMLE, and saddle point approximation. Would you actually say that saddle point approximation is an alternative to exact conditional method?
To some extent, yes. Yep. If you're interested in precision, you want exact values, precise values, then yes, you have to wait for exact and perform the exact analysis. But SPA will also give you the conditional inference. So suppose before going into detail exact analysis, you would like to perform SPA and get the idea that how each covariate is performing. So that way SPA will give you the idea, and if you're not interested in precision, you just want some, if you're happy with the approximation, yes, you can get the SPA results easily in less time.
Okay, you're saying it can be actually used as an exploratory
Yes.
analysis
Yes.
tool.
Yeah.
Are there any specific situations or data sets where saddle point approximation might be a better option than other existing methods?
Yes, as I said, for conditional inference, we cannot use MLE. Exact we can use for small samples, but as soon as the data is of mid-size or large size, even exact may not work. or the memory will not be sufficient on your machine. You may rely on Monte Carlo approximation, but then I will say going for SPA is better than Monte Carlo, because in SPA we are not deleting any information, or we are not choosing from the whole information something. We are conditioning.
Right. Okay, thanks. And one last question on SPA is, can you explain the use of the SPA distribution for any further inference? Like how can it be used?
Yeah, so SPA distribution, if you see here for CD4, so here we have conditioned it on CD8 and we have got the CD4 distribution. So there are 21 points. The first 20 points are actually equidistant points of beta, and 21st line, it shows the MLE, maximum likelihood estimate, computed using SPA. That is the modified profile likelihood. So if you consider these first 20 points, this will actually give you 20 points on that modified profile likelihood, and the corresponding profile likelihood, modified profile likelihood, everything you get the statistic also. So once you have the 20 points, if you want, you can use the interpolation, and generally people use interpolation to generate this kind of graph which I showed you. And once you have the log likelihood function, you can have all the likelihood based inferences. You can find the median, you can find any percentile for that matter, not only confidence interval. So all the likelihood based inferences you can draw once you have the likelihood function in place.
Okay, thank you very much, Ashwini, again for this webinar. Well, that brings us to the end of this webinar. Thank you again, everyone, for listening to our on-demand webinar on saddle point approximation method. Don't forget to check out the other webinars in this series. The two before this webinar were on stat-exact features, unconditional test for stratified two binomials, and the test for multiple endpoints with gatekeeping procedures. You can view these webinars by visiting www.cytel.com. And to learn more about stat-exact and log-exact's new release, please visit our website, www.cytel.com/software. Thank you again.